Welcome and good evening. Welcome to tonight's Bergoglio Lecture, which is sponsored by the Department of Catholic Studies and hosted by the Center for Contemporary Catholic Conversations. The Bergoglio Lecture, in the spirit of Pope Francis, for whom the lecture is named, aims to demonstrate the claims and the ideas of the Catholic intellectual tradition. And most of you are here from the CIT seminars, right? From the Human Journey seminars. And in those seminars, we define the Catholic intellectual tradition as an ongoing, evolving conversation between the great thinkers of the church from the past to the present, asking big questions about God, humanity, society, and nature. And tonight, we are so thrilled and honored to have with us Sister Ilia Delio, who is indeed one of the great thinkers of the Catholic intellectual tradition. Her work is, I would say, prodigious, creative, visionary, imaginative, and I'll tell you a little bit about it, but listening to her tonight, you'll hear that what I've just described is true about the way she thinks. She holds the Josephine Connolly Endowed Chair in Theology at Villanova University. She has 2 doctoral degrees and umpteen master's degrees, but 1 doctoral degree is in pharmacology from Rutgers, and the 2nd doctoral degree is in theology from Fordham University. She's the author of more than 20 books, and probably by tomorrow she'll have like the 21st book out. We're talking at lunch, and I said, "You have 19 books?" She said, "Well, no, I think it's 21, but now this new one's coming out." Over hundreds of articles, presentations. Her work intersects theology, Catholicity, science, specifically evolution, neuroscience, physics, artificial intelligence, consciousness, and the emergence of God in human existence. In her work, she shows us how science and religion are 2 compatible ways of knowing the world. And her talk tonight on evolution and posthumanism and the new Catholicity will be a demonstration of that intersection between theology and science. But what I really want to tell you is something about what is inside of her, the energy and the spirit that I think ignites her. And I think I can do it best by quoting her, from her memoir, talking about her own evolving human journey. She says that her life was seized by the power of love, seized by the power of love, and that the road to God is love. At the center of Dr. Delio's own human journey is that love. For her, it is the power of love which connects God, humanity, and the universe. And it's this ever-evolving love that is both at the center of her work on science and theology and at the core of her being. And it is that love which she brings to us this evening. And she is now a new member of the Sacred Heart family, having been given an honorary degree this afternoon. And so I'm totally honored and pleased to present to you Sister Ilia Delio.
Thank you for that warm welcome. Thank you, Father Tony, for your introduction, and thank you for all being here. It's really an honor to be here at Sacred Heart University. It's a fabulous university. It looks like a really great community. So I hope to share with you, about 80 slides this evening. Yeah, that's okay. Here's the title, Evolution, Posthumanism, the New Catholicity. And it sounds like, what is she going to talk about, right? So my area of work, as Michelle indicated, is trying to bridge science and religion. How can insights from science help us understand God and the things of God in a new way? And how can God and the things of God shed new light on science? You know, all that I'm saying this evening was not too foreign from the way the early Greeks thought about the universe. In fact, the word Catholicity did not emerge in the Catholic Church. It actually emerged among the ancient Greeks. As the universe, as they began to emerge into a new cosmology, where there was not just a flat earth, but a flat earth with volume to it, a cosmos, an order of things. The Greeks began to then realize that the human person is the observer of the universe. And so they coined this word Catholic from the Greek kata, or according to, and holos, or whole. So the word katholikos really means according to the whole. So Catholicity is about whole-making. It's about the whole. And I thought, when I first discovered that, I thought that is so much more enriching than thinking of an institution called Catholic Church. But in fact, it's an awareness that this universe is a whole, and early Christians picked up this idea and said, God is at the heart of the whole. And therefore, it was an appropriate word to begin to use to describe the early Christian movement, a Catholic movement, where in fact Christ is the center. In other words, God is present, within that whole as incarnate. And so early Christianity really saw a connection between whole-making, Catholicity, and cosmology. Cosmology being one cosmos, now having one whole with God as center. One God creates one whole, and Christ is the center. And that kind of fittingness between the cosmos and the human awareness of the cosmos really played out from the early church into the Middle Ages, where the human person had a defined role in the cosmos. We were in this cosmos, which was described by the Greek astronomer Ptolemy, this fixed, you see it's kind of very nice and circular. Those of you who have studied Hildegard of Bingen, with the colors. And the earth was the center of this cosmos, and the human person was the center of the earth. So there we were in the middle, and we were the knowers, right? So we can gaze up at the stars, and we can wonder, who are you, O God, who makes this earth, and who am I? There was a fittingness between gazing at the heavens in this wider world and the search for identity. And so, we brought in Greek philosophy of matter and form to make sense of what we are as body and soul. And it all kind of worked together for the medieval theologians. And here's, in a sense, what happened. Stargazing is a huge thing. I mean, I love to go out at night, and look up at the sky. Well, in the late 14th, 15th century, Nicholas Copernicus and others were stargazing. And they said, it doesn't look like the earth is the center here. He said, I think the sun could be center. And sure enough, starting to measure the fact that the planets are moving around the sun. And Copernicus began to realize this is not a geocentric cosmos, an earth-centered cosmos. This is a sun-centered cosmos. Well, this caused a little difficulty because up to the Middle Ages, all our theology was really based on a earth-centered cosmos with the human as center. Once that began to shift, there was a little tension. And the tension came with Galileo. Galileo, a wonderful Italian astronomer and mathematician, began to observe more closely and measure and said, indeed, Nick was right. This is a sun-centered cosmos. And therefore, as he began to convey his ideas to the church put a stop to it. Wait a minute. Saying that Cardinal Bellarmine wrote in 1633 this doctrine attributed to Copernicus, that the earth moves around the sun, and the sun stands at the center of the world without moving from east to west. This is contrary to Holy Scripture and cannot be held or defended. So the church held on to a geocentric cosmos. When science began to understand better, this is a heliocentric cosmos. Now we're talking 15th century, 16th century. Well, Galileo went under house arrest, but he was in Florence, Italy, and truthfully, that's a good place to be if you have to go under house arrest, because great food, just no television or internet. But we grew up, basically I think certainly older people grew up with two cosmologies. We have a religious cosmology, which is, in a sense, still based on a static fixed universe, and we live in our everyday world of shifting understandings of science. And so the heliocentric universe caused a lot of questioning, and I think René Descartes, the French mathematician philosopher, tried to restore a sense of Catholicity, a sense of wholeness, by saying, well, the earth is moving. How can we know anything for certain? And he said, well, I think, and I exist, therefore I am, and therefore my mind is a sense of my own certainty. And this stuff called the body or the world is not so certain. So there was a kind of distinction there drawn between the mind and matter. And we call this, taken to its many levels, a kind of Cartesian dualism, right? My mind is distinct from my body. And after Descartes, we begin to see science taking off, just building on sort of the stuff of matter. Just stuff. It's just stuff. You can do with it what you want. You can dice it up, slice it up, build it up, tear it down. It has no meaning. And I think this kind of dualism led to some great scientific discoveries, actually, in physiology and chemistry, but it also left us cut off from the wider cosmos. We became, in a sense, un-Catholic, if I can use that in a small c term, right? We lost a sense of the whole. And this kind of losing sense of the whole became consolidated in a kind of left brain thinking. We became very good at observing, measuring, analyzing data, but we lost sense of what do we do with the data? How does it make sense in terms of, our being in this cosmos? And so Cartesian dualism gave way then to Newton's world. Sir Isaac Newton was a deist. Newton's God was sort of what I call the Florida God, a God who put everything in motion and then retired to Orlando, and then would check in, like how's things going down there in the world. And we kind of, there's a lot of people, we still have this kind of Newtonian God, like, God watching over us, kind of idea. God is watching over, and things happen, like God is supposed to intervene and correct things. We call that the God of gaps. But basically, Newton's world is just a world of things that are connected. Like, I'm me, you are you, and we both like punk rock music, And so we're just connected, but not intrinsically. We're just connected in a sense relationally, but not essentially. So Newton's world helped build our modern world. It's a world of lawfulness, a world of order. Like, you know where your house is, where your school is, where you go to church, what car you drive. And so the old maxim was keep the rule and the rule will keep you, right? Follow the laws, stop at the stop sign. When there's a red light, stop. When there's a green light, go. So Newton's laws and Newton's world still is around with us. But the thing is, in the early 20th century, excuse me, I forgot some water. Our universe shifted thanks to a little Swiss patent officer by the name of Albert Einstein, who really had a boring job, actually, as a patent officer. And he had a great imagination, and he was very good at math. And so Einstein began to just imagine, what would it be like to ride a beam of light at the speed of light? Is that what you think about in the morning? He was unhappy with Newton's laws of absolute space and absolute time. So from Einstein, and based on his intuitions, he began to develop the theory of special relativity, and from there, general relativity. And we began to realize that this is not a world of just fixed objects that are related to one another, this is a world of unfolding space-time. Space-time not as space and time, but as a continuum. And the way he began to realize that, and of course this is the universe we live in today, in case you weren't sure why I have this picture here, right? So we live in a very, very, very old universe, like 13.8 billion years old. Who could possibly get their heads around 13.8 billion years? So we're here for a very, very short amount of time, 70, 80, 90, 100 with good drugs. Most of this universe is dark energy, the energy of expansion, so it will continue to expand, but a small part of it is dark matter, which holds it together. So we're not flying off into space, and we're not all collapsing into one another. It's very finely tuned, which is really amazing. And what Einstein began to realize is that the stuff we call matter, is really a form of energy. That matter and energy are not two distinct things, but they're actually interconvertible, right? So, the same matter can change its energy state and become, for example, a drop of water can become a little form of ice or a vapor, depending on, the amount of energy that's there. So from Einstein, we began to realize that, wait a minute, scientists began doing experiments and thinking, do we really know what matter is? And for the longest time, we thought of matter as something separate from us. Like this is a table and this is a pole and I'm a person. But we had no place for the mind in relation. The mind was something that humans had that seemed to be somehow distinct to humans and unrelated to matter. And quantum physics, began to arise and say, wait a minute, what we call a particle actually is stranger than what we think. And they started doing these experiments called double slit experiments and other types of experiments where they began to realize that, a particle can exist in a wave-like, has a wave-like property and can be both a wave and a particle. That's weird. Okay, that's just totally weird. And it can be in superimposed states. And you're thinking, wow, what does that mean? And the only way we know what it is and where it is by measuring it. And so quantum physics ushered in for us a distinct role for the mind, for consciousness. And this is the big discussion today, that consciousness is sort of the name of the game when it comes to matter. So Max Planck, the great physicist in the 20th century, said, I regard consciousness as fundamental, that we can't even talk about matter apart from consciousness. There is no matter apart from consciousness, as far as we know. He says, I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything we talk about, everything we regard as existing, postulates consciousness. So everything begins with mind or consciousness. Really interesting, right? In fact, physicists went on to say, look, this stuff is so weird, this quantum physics, that if two particles have interacted and you split those particles apart and you put one particle here, on this little podium at Sacred Heart, and you put the other particle on the moon, that if I turn this particle 180 degrees upward, the particle on the moon will turn 180 degrees downward. And before people go, what? That is crazy, right? They went on to do experiments to show, indeed, this is true. Once particles have interacted, they interact forever. So we call this non-local action at a distance, or spooky action at a distance. And we have this kind of entanglement phenomenon many times, I think, but we're not aware of it. For example, if you're a good friend or someone you worked with, you've interacted with, moves away, they move to another state. And one day you're thinking, gee, I wonder how Sue is doing. You haven't heard from her in 2 years, and all of a sudden you're going, I wonder how Sue's doing. And within a half an hour, there's an email from Sue, or a phone call. And we used to say, what a coincidence, I was just thinking about you. Now we can say, we're quantumly entangled, right? So whoever you interact with, you are with them forever. in some way, and your actions will somehow redound on them. And so there's lots of, in a sense, things from quantum physics to show us that what we call nature, the stuff of nature, the very kind of overarching term for this matter-energy, relatedness, in fact, is a type of holism, that nature in its fundamental roots is not composed of material substances, but deeply entangled fields of energy. And as David Bohm, the quantum physicist, says, the nature of the universe is undivided wholeness. That, at the heart of things, he says, as humans and societies, we seem separate, but in our roots, we're part of the same cosmic process. We belong to a whole because we belong to nature. And therefore, what science adds to that is that this nature is dynamic. And the word evolution is the word that best describes the unfolding of nature in towards something more. There's an openness of nature or life to more life. Life seeks more life. That's basically what it is. Evolution's always associated with Darwin, but he just, make sure you get in at a conversation at the right time, which is what Darwin did, because there were other people who had been talking about evolution, but he just kind of put a spin on it, and that's what we associated with. I think what Darwin was just trying to show is that there's diversity in nature because nature's dynamic. Nature changes. Nature is open, right? New things can happen in nature. And we're part of a type of playful nature, a creative nature. That's what nature does. Nature will always go beyond itself when the environment is constricted or confined. Life will always seek to transcend itself towards more life. So we humans, here we are, we're emerging out of a long, long cosmic history. We are, in a sense, evolution. We're the whole universe now on the level of self-consciousness. We can know the very universe that has enabled us to know. Isn't that amazing? That's just mind-boggling. We can know the universe that has caused us or made us, in a sense, be able to know. So we hold not a central position in this universe, we hold a frontier position. We're sort of the leading edge of this evolutionary universe. Now, here's where, where's religion in this question? Well, the church, the Catholic Church, acknowledges evolution to some extent. It says that the body can come about by way of evolution, but the soul is created directly by God. Okay, well, we need to really talk about that one. I think, in some ways, this best captures it, Evolution is occurring faster for one part of, humanity and less so for others, right? So, and yet, what's our fastest evolver today? Technology. Technology has really sped up evolution. In other words, it has almost quadrupled the pace. Now, there's two things I want to say here. One, I remember when the first cell phone came out. That's how old I am. All right, and I grew up in New Jersey where we had a phone on the wall. I know for you younger folks, it's hard to imagine. We had actually a phone on the wall with a 3-foot cord. That's as far as you could go, and your mother heard your whole conversation, if you were in the kitchen. And I remember them saying, they're going to make a phone that you can carry in your hands. This is like the late 70s. I'm like, what? That's crazy. Sure enough, AT&T came out with this foot-long thing, that weighed like 10 pounds. And then in the 80s, they said, they're going to put a computer in a phone. And I said, what's a computer? I never heard of such a thing. So this technology has come on the scene with a rapid pace. Artificial intelligence and computer technology emerged within a decade of the ecological movement. They grow up almost at the same time. Ecology has been like a slow aging turtle. We've known it for years, decades, about pesticides, about, pollution, about global warming. This is not new, but we haven't been attracted to really do much about it. Technology, on the other hand, is the coolest thing that was ever made. And so I wonder, what is it about technology that just draws us into it? And here's the thing. I think this is the medieval cosmos here on the left, and this is a circuit on the right. Technology is the new space of transcendence. Just as the medievalists went into gaze in the heavens in the Middle Ages and could be drawn by the unknown, by mystery, by the name of God, of far beyond, pulling us forward. That same space now has been transferred to the electronic circuit. We go online to seek what is not yet visible in our lives. We search for what we cannot yet know, right? There's something there that's alluring. And part of the lure is that religion itself has not kept pace with evolution. It sort of stopped and sort of kept the medieval train, sort of the wheels rolling on that. There's a lot of literature to say why religion and technology actually go together. That technology is not just a tool for our use, it is pulling us and it draws us because there's something deeply connecting about it. Brett Robinson, in his book, Appletopia, it's a book about Apple Corporation, speaks about a loss of transcendence in the modern age being renewed by technology. There's something about that technology that is alluring, right? Even if you go on Amazon, the choices are infinite. You can go into any app, right? You can find an avatar. If your life's boring, go into Second Life, get an avatar, and become something different, right? It's endless, infinite space. And yet, Brett Robinson says the sacred is now relocated to subjective experience, right? Even playing God and in video games, right? There's a whole God mode where you can have the power to decide who's going to win and who's going to lose. So cyberspace, he says, is the place where the physical and the metaphysical can meet. And therefore, it's a whole new draw for us, to the point where Roberto Parada's painting of the incarnation with Steve Jobs as the new Jesus, right? The new Christ figure, where the Apple computer now, is the new savior, where Andy Warhol and Walter Cronkite, are the disciples. And so, it's telling us, culture tells us something about us. It's a mirror for us. What is it that we see in this mirror? What do we know about ourselves in this mirror? So, Philip Hefner writes, we create technology in order to bring alternate worlds into being, worlds that differ from the actual worlds we live in. Now that's really important for us because part of if the mind is essential to matter, and our minds are being drawn into alternative worlds of transcendence in technology, we are not attentive to the world we actually are engaged in, the world of ecology. Technology, however, re-enchants the secular with a new sense of the sacred, a sense of, the holy or the divine. And as Hefner says, although we are busy creating new realities, we do not know why we're creating them or what values we want with them. Technology is a blind endeavor. Where are we going with it? What do we want with it? We have no clue whatsoever. But we keep buying it. 4G, 5G, iPhone 10, iPhone 11, the coolest thing possible. We want it, we'll line up for it, we'll spend all our money for it. And as, many writers tell us, cyberspace now fills a psychological religious void in modern life. I'd much rather go online on Sunday on my social media sites than go to church because it's cool, I can be with my friends, I can even get my prayers answered online. Google has everything. There's actually a church of Google, believe it or not, with prayers of Google. I won't go there. So here's the question, are we losing our minds? If mind is so fundamental to matter, where are our minds? And for the most part, they are there and not here. Wherever there is in that world of cyberspace. The movie Her, I teach a course in technology and the human person. Poor Theodore Twombly had a failed marriage and kind of a dull, miserable life, but he marries the, cool operating system, right? And his life reawakens. We're made for relationship, right? And yet in the end, it's a failed relationship for him. He's disappointed. So constant computer use, and people like Nicholas Carr and Sherry Turkle are pointing out that, constant computer use can lead to impatience. We want things now, immediate. We can't spend a lot of time to sift through things. We're forgetful because we've exported a lot of our, frontal cortex onto Wikipedia and Google. So why think anymore when Google can do it for us? We tend to be impulsive, we make decisions very quickly. He claims there's a sense of narcissism. The iPhone is the I phone, everything that centers around me in my life. And yet we know there's a greater sense of loneliness and depression today than ever before. And we have to ask, what is it, that we're missing out on here? Carr, again, says in his book, The Shallows, we're losing depth. We're losing the ability to think deeply. We tend to reduce persons to algorithms. And we know that, anything you call today, the public works utilities, the phone company, it's what's your social security number, what's your ID number, who cares what you are. So instant information and the inability to handle ambiguity, which is huge, right? We don't do well because it's in bits, zeros and ones. So what do we do with the in-between? We don't know what to do. And as many people tell us, this is an irreversible trend. So as Sherry Turkle says in her book Alone Together, we are in a process of making one another disappear by living more of our lives apart from other humans and in the company of machines. We're alone together. Really interesting. Now, on top of that, even though we are alone together, we love it. And there's something about technology that challenges where we are and stretches us to what we can become. The cyborg emerged in the early 60s with space travel. And it's short for cybernetic organism. As we began to understand nature in terms of information, in terms of cybernetics, in terms of open systems, we began to realize, hey, we can send someone to space. We can put, an oxygen tank on them. We can put some things to help them keep moving. So a cyborg is a human who has physiological processes aided or controlled by mechanical or electronic devices. So that tells us something about the human person. We can enhance what we are by, in a sense, strapping ourselves to something that is not necessarily biological. So a cyborg is a hybrid of biology and machine, which means that the human person, as person, is now brought into question. Boundaries are only local for the embodied subject, which means we're moving beyond biological essentialism. And younger generations, I think, kind of know this. It's an intuitive knowledge, and it's a little bit challenging for older generations. As we begin to realize that we can't just throw away our computers and cell phones, that these things are not just tools for us, they're extensions of us. And that's sort of the cyborg dimension of our cultural lives today. That the machine and the human are forming something that transcend the human alone. And so it's changing the way we think about ourselves. And here I think what cyborg and cyborgization, the process, tells us is what counts as human is not and should not be self-evident. The whole human person today is now a question, and no longer can we presume to know what the human person is. This is where I find, in a sense, religion just a little bit not up to date. Let's just put it that way. Okay, we tend to define the human person with categories that seem to be quite known, and technology is saying no, not so known. That we can implant mechanics, in humans. Biomedical technology, huge in this regard. So from cyborg and cyborgization, we have two trends emerging. One is known as transhumanism, and the other is known as posthumanism. Transhumanism looks to enhance the human or perfect the human by means of technology. Posthumanism looks to reconfigure the human in relation to the wider environment. And I'll just say a word of each of these. What I want to point out is that transhumanism is largely written by men, and it extends the Enlightenment thinking that we must become Superman, right? The Übermensch of Nietzsche, right? We can perfect ourselves. We can become gods by our own creativities. Posthumanism arises out of critical feminism, and it's about transgressing those boundaries that constrain our personhood, and that can, you might say, extend what we are beyond the liberal subject. So transhumanism are those technologies that can improve mental and physical aspects of our human condition: suffering, aging, disease, death. And it's basically saying, look, we can fix ourselves, we can better ourselves, we can become smarter. You may not even have to take exams in the future. You can just have your avatar, your robot, just send them in. You'll be wired to them, and somehow it'll all work out and you'll get your degree. And so transhumanism says, live longer, live happier, live smarter, right? With more control over your lives. Be a transhumanist. Even a transhuman democracy. Maybe no more presidents. We'll just have maybe some kind of R2-D2 or something, as controlling things. In its most radical form, transhumanism seeks a type of utopia through technology. And believe me, there's a lot of money in this research. Google, Microsoft, Silicon Valley has a lot of money invested in transhumanist ventures. Silicon neural interfaces, brain chips, brain prosthesis. There's even brain transplants. So if you're not happy with your head, we can get you a new one. It's a lot of money, but it's possible. Nanoneural networking. It kind of boggles the imagination sometimes. Now, what the amazing thing is that this type of transhumanist technology really builds on Christian principles: salvation, immortality, and happiness, eschatology. As Dan Crevier, a computer scientist, said, AI is consistent with Christian belief in resurrection and immortality. Christ was resurrected in a new body. Why not a machine? Anja Jacqueline said the development toward technosapient might be regarded as a step toward the kingdom of God. What else can we say when the lame walk, the blind see, the deaf hear, and the dead are at least virtually alive? The aims of technology and the aims of the gospel are consonant with each other. Ray Kurzweil, the great transhumanist researcher at Google, the chief, actually, director of Google Research, claims that by 2045, we will have overcome the death barrier. So we won't have to worry about dying. We'll have death reversal by brain downloading. So Hans Warbeck says the same thing. We'll just have personal immortality by mind transplant. So if you've seen the movie Transcendence with Johnny Depp, kind of moving in that direction. Martine Rothblatt says we will have new language, mind clones, mindware, mind files. You will go, like you go to the ATM machine and get your money, you'll go to the ATM machine with your mind file card. You need more memory, you put the card in. You're not having a good week, you need to be happy, put the card in. We can upload maybe new information for happiness, joy, peace, and you think, wow, man, this is really crazy. Steve Jobs' famous line, think different. Those who are crazy enough to think this is possible will create it. A lot of this type of technology builds on the fact that technology will fulfill what religion promises. And basically what technology says is religion is a failure. It comes right out of the Enlightenment, right? It says, look, all religion has done has led us down a path of war and conflict. It has sort of, it's sort of left behind, a world that's seeking to transcend itself. Posthumanism, coming out of critical feminism, says it's not really about human enhancement so much as getting out of this concept of the modern liberal male subject, the autonomous being, exercising choice through individual agency. So the posthumanism is one who extends the self in and through technology, what we call the electronically embedded person, where the subjectivity is an emergent process, that we're becoming something more in and through our technologies, not something other. And therefore, the posthuman emerges from and is integrated into this chaotic world of information-human interactions rather than mastering it. And it's kind of a new logic of relationality, where it's not just me and the robot, rather it's the robot and I together, in a sense, form a relationship where what I am is enhanced in and through this relationship. So it's a type of, a new structure of relationality emerging here. So the posthuman, and it's a sense, I think younger generations sort of know this, the kind of constant on the phone, checking friends, checking text messages, because there's something of the self that's, in a sense, extended into who I am connected to in the wider sphere of my connections, right? So it's not a question of leaving the body behind, but of extending embodied awareness through ways that would be impossible without the device or the tool. So posthumanism looks to hyper-personalization. And it's the same thing like today, why we are getting out of the neighborhoods of one house, and we're building like condos on tops of restaurants where we have wired places. So there's a whole interwebbing of connectivity and personhood. So as Catherine Hales writes in her book, How We Became Posthuman, in the posthuman, there are no essential differences between bodily existence and the computer, between cybernetic mechanisms and biological organisms, robots, and human goals. She says basically this: the age of the human is drawing to a close. What we have known as the human person is basically, in the next 100 to few hundred years, will be, in a sense, more history than reality. And it seems shocking to us, but the fact is, we haven't always been this way, right? We are in evolution. We've always been in evolution. There never was a time when we weren't in evolution. So we are the Homo sapiens species, about 140,000 years old. Now we're on the verge of Techno-sapiens species. We will become something new. And it shocks us. It's like, what? Gee, where did I get this one from, And a lot of the difficulty is because our religious rhetoric and the way we have been formed to think about ourselves has been, God created Adam and Eve, and here we are, male and female, he created them. In his image, he created them, and we're to be saved by Jesus and go to heaven. Right? Does that sound familiar? Yeah, well, welcome to the world of evolution, all right? And so the fact is, that's a nice story. They worked, at the time periods, but we need a new narrative. And without the religious dimension of our lives, technology is a train blindly running into the future. And we have no idea what that future will be for us without any kind of deeper aims or purpose. And that's where I have relied on the work of the Jesuit scientist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Teilhard, a French scientist, paleontologist, one who lived 100 years ago now, he was writing this stuff in the World War I, 1920s, 1930s. And he had a vision of what I call deep Catholicity, deep wholeness. And what Teilhard said, he said, the human world of today has not grown cold, but it is ardently searching for a God proportionate to the newly discovered immensities of a universe whose aspect exceeds the present compass of our power of worship. And he wrote this back in 1927. We're out of sync, right, between the church and modern science. And the way Teilhard began to rethink things is he paid attention to what physics was saying. And physics is saying mind is part of matter. That we can't extract mind, it's not kind of in some spiritual realm, that it is the inside of matter itself. And so Teilhard spoke of these two energies, an energy of transcendence, an energy that keeps pulling us forward, an energy, a forward energy, and an energy of attraction, a tangential energy. And he said consciousness has these two dimensions. We are aware and transcend, and yet we're attracted. And that led him to look at the material universe as an inner-outer movement of matter itself. And he said, the core energy of evolution, what energy has both an energy of attraction and an energy of beyond oneself, transcendence? And he said, it's love. Love is a center-to-center attraction, and yet in that attraction, we go beyond ourselves, right? In union with the other. And he saw love at the level of all levels of physical life in the universe. So he said, the physical structure of the universe is love. This is not a religious statement yet. This is first only on what he was learning from the material universe. Now, he goes on to say that what holds the whole together and moves this towards ever greater levels of conscious being in love. And he names that principle as Omega, a center of absolute wholeness, a center that's within us, and yet moving us forward. And he names that God Omega. God is that center of wholeness within, and that wholeness that's drawing us beyond. God who is knowing and loving, to say in the Augustinian sense. And so Teilhard, like Carl Jung, did not see that God was up there, sort of watching over things, but he thought that God is here in matter. That's, by the way, the incarnation, right? The whole thing is God became flesh. The Word became flesh. The Word becomes matter. So he says, God needs humankind to become both whole and complete. Now that's shocking to us because we're pretty sure God is perfect and doesn't need us. And both Jung and Teilhard said, no, God, that's the incarnation, signifies that God is open to completion in and through us. We make a difference to God's life. God and the world form a complementary pair, he said, an entangled whole. And therefore, what we become in relation to the God, in a sense, affects what God becomes in relation to us. So for Teilhard, the dynamism of God and the evolution of humanity cannot be separated. That we are evolving because God is doing new things. God is becoming something new in us. And so he sees this emergent wholeness of the whole Big Bang story as a whole rising up of God in evolution, where creation, incarnation, redemption are not three separate things, like we have Christmas and Easter and then we're, but it's all one act of God's self-involving love. God loving into being, drawing into being, uniting being into something more. And therefore, he speaks of the universe and Christ as, in a sense, belonging together. And he says, who is is Christ? What is Christ about? You know, our classic definition is that Jesus came to save us from sin, right? If Adam had not sinned, Christ would not have come. And Taylor said, no, that's not the reason. Christ is God's first intention to love and therefore to create. That whether or not sin ever existed, Christ would have come. The universe is made for the Christ because the universe is made for love. And the universe is made for a conscious being in love. And therefore, Jesus is that beingness in love who comes to a deep awareness, right, of God's presence, a new structure of consciousness. In Jesus, we find the faithful Jew. No, Jesus was not Catholic, by the way. I just want you to make sure that we're on the same page here, right? Yeah, he was Jewish. And so he has a sense of God's immediate presence. And he was a disruptor. He was not, let's all stay home and be nice to one another. He was, you know, he made people nervous and destabilized. And so in Jesus, we can say the Word was made conscious flesh. Consciousness and divinity come together, you might say. And this sort of sums up what all cosmic life is about. So I see Jesus, and I think I'm reading here into Theology, you know, Jesus as a new Big Bang, a new singularity, a new structure of existence. Jesus as the cyborg, right? You know, and people are like, what? Jesus as cyborg, right? The boundaries are pushed with Jesus. He transcends those boundaries. He goes out to people who the Jews would never go out to, right? He's sort of a mutation. He does new things. He is sort of like a strange attractor. He's Jewish, but he's not really like the other Jews. He's different. And therefore, Jesus is sort of a technology of the spirit, a technology of the mind, focusing it in a new way on a new life. And so, what Jesus says to us is new wine must be put into new wineskins, that God is becoming and seeks to become God in us, right? Ongoing incarnation. God rises up in consciousness, and it is enhanced by humankind in evolution. And therefore, even the death of Jesus is, in a sense, an experience of, you know, his own ego is shattered in that death, and therefore we see a breakthrough in love in that cross. That, in fact, the cross is the fullest revelation of God as love. That's where we begin to realize what kind of God, you know, we're talking about here. A God who does new things, a creative newness of life, in a sense, by shattering the partials of our lives into the wholeness of new life. So, you know, in the early church, Christians came to a new awareness, right? If you were a Christian in the early church, you had a new mind. You had an awareness that God had broken into the world, that we are called to do new things, to live in a new way. And this new sense of selfhood was daring, it was adventurous, it was creative, and it was new. And I think Jesus puts it best, you know, where your mind is, there your treasure lies. And I think today this is our problem. Where are our minds? We want a new world. We want, you know, global warming to cease, and we want justice and peace. But our minds are all over the place, right? They're scattered in our many, many domains of informational, you know, contacts. And therefore, Teilhard says is we need to return to a sense of the inward universe, the inner universe, and the outer universe really form the one universe. And so there's a place for the renewal of the mystical life today. I think especially in light of quantum physics, but that's another discussion. So here I bring the Buddha and St. Francis of Assisi, who both, in a sense, discovered this profound oneness at the heart of their lives in different ways. But as Thomas Merton said, if I penetrate to the depths of my own existence, to the indefinable am that is myself, the deepest roots, through this deep center, I pass into something that's infinite, which is the very name of the Almighty. The infinite depth of the inner life is, in the sense that presence of God in us. that God who is seeking to become God in and through us, to radiate through our lives. So Teilhard says, look, we are part and parcel of this universe, but we cannot know it unless we begin to harness our inner energies, to contemplate this inner center. And the more we can become aware of the God within us, we will become aware of what God is doing in and through us as we, in a sense, continue to create and move forward. So, Albert Einstein had that wonderful passage in a letter he wrote in 1950. He says, a human being is a part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. One experiences oneself, one's thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, which is kind of an optical illusion, he says, of one's consciousness. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. What is the prison of the self? What keeps us from belonging to the whole? And Teilhard thought about this question a lot, and he says contemplation, to contemplate, to center, meditation, yoga, whatever it is, we need to unplug and sit quietly and begin to know, ourselves in a deeper way. And as Teilhard did that, Teilhard lived for a long time in the deserts of China. And he says he began to contemplate the ineffable depths of matter itself. Matter has an ineffable depth, and it's driving physicists crazy today. They can't get to the end of it because that depth is not something that's graspable. Teilhard began, as he became more one in his life, he became more one with the moon and stars and the life where God is present throughout. And so I'm just going to move on here to say that contemplation maximizes consciousness. Our minds are thinned out because we're desperately seeking that oneness and unity that's already within us. And therefore, what Teilhard says is that when our minds and hearts can expand in love, when we can live from an inner center of oneness, of Catholicity, God is born in us and through us then into the universe. And so, I think what Teilhard is saying is this in a very simple way. We are matter. We are bodies, right? We're not just separate souls. We're not just thinking substances. We're bodies in search of a meaning for our lives. Matter has meaning. Matter is where matter matters to God, if I can put it in that language. And so Teilhard says, I bless you, matter, and you I acclaim, not as the pontiffs of science or the moralizing preachers depict you, debased, disfigured, a mass of brute forces, but you as you reveal yourself to me in your totality and your true nature. So at the end he says, raise me up then, matter, until at long last it becomes possible for me in perfect chastity to embrace the universe. Matter. And this is where I ask, where is theology with regard to matter? Where is religion with regard to matter? Nowhere. Nowhere to be found, right? We have abstract concepts. We have abstract ideas. And what Teilhard is saying, no, this God, the God who is the source and creator, this God is in the heart of matter itself. And people would say, oh, isn't that pantheism? That's the first question people ask. A little pantheism can go a long way. And therefore, what he's saying is that incarnation is what the Big Bang universe is about, what we call the cosmic Christ, right? So the whole thing is the unfolding of God rising up in evolution in and through a conscious awareness of God, right? When we become aware of God, we grow in love. When we begin to love in a new way, a dynamic way. And so this is where Teilhard, you have to know Teilhard, how he begins to understand this universe that science has been talking about for the last 100 of years, and begin to understand it in terms of what God is doing here. And then he says, look, evolution has come to its end in terms of diversity. If we are to survive on this earth, the only way forward, he says, is to converge and unify. And these are the birth pangs we're going through today. We are on the cusp of evolutionary convergence, and we're fighting it tooth and nail. We want to be nation states. We want, Brexit, is a good example. Like, we don't want to be part of anything that's a complex whole. And what Teilhard is saying is, no, this is the only way forward, and technology can help us. So he puts technology back into the evolutionary movement towards greater complexity in consciousness. So he saw the role of technology as one of convergence. Well, that's exactly what it has done, right? So technology has shrunk our world. That we know what's happening in Afghanistan and Iraq and around the world, right? It can draw minds and hearts together, as Greta Thunberg has recently shown us, right? School strikes throughout the globe. That's what technology can do. I can go on social media and say, we're not going to school tomorrow, unless this earth becomes green. That's the good of technology. And so Teilhard says we should consider this interthinking humanity as a new type of organism emerging, to realize new possibilities for life on this earth. So there's a good there, but we have to add to that, we're not looking to perfect ourselves, but we're looking for more being, as Teilhard said. We're looking for more life. We're looking to deepen what we are. We're looking to become more than what we are in order that we can truly be what we are. So he says, technology can extend the outreach of human activity, but it depends how we control psychic, spiritual energy needs and powers. It needs religion in order to really help us move to something that's more than what we are now. Or as Phil Hefner says, if we cannot imagine that religion takes shape in technology, then we have eliminated the religious depth dimension of the most significant development in human becoming. We will continue to unravel even as we continue to grow together through technology. So I won't, I have a lot of principles here, but I'm looking at the time. Basically what Teilhard is saying is, this is a dynamic universe we emerge from. We are caught up in the dynamic movement of this universe, but God is at the heart of the whole kit and caboodle. God is not other than matter. God is the divine depth, the ultimacy of matter itself. And so, in his view, post-human or ultra-human life is oriented toward a new Catholicity. We have a new wholeness on the horizon, but it is awaiting a new understanding of a lived relationship with God, a new type of worship, a new way of forming community. And without religion, I think AI has no real aim or purpose. We can get smarter, we can move faster, but we don't know where we're going. And I think that's a lot of where we find ourselves today. We find ourselves sort of seeking. Who's there? And who's ever there, we're not attentive to what's here, in our midst. So are we really helping the earth, or are we part of the division of the earth? Where your mind is, there is where the rest of you lies. So what Teilhard says is we need a new faith in God, and we need a new faith in the world. A faith in the world that we belong to together. And he says, in the future, the only religion possible is the religion which will teach us, in the first place, to recognize, love, and serve with passion the universe of which we form a part. So he opted for a new religion of the earth, a new spirit of the earth. And that's, in a sense, what we need to focus on. Because if you are very attuned to where the sci-fi movies, the tech movies are, telling us, we will have a very strange future in the not too distant future, right? Those of you who watch Black Mirror on Netflix, Those of you who have seen movies like Transcendence or AI or whatever movies are around, in other words, we're building androids to mimic us because there's something about us that longs to become something more than us. And unless we direct our energies in a way that is consonant with the source of our life, we can go either way. We can have a very strange future, a dystopic future, or we can have a unified Earth, or what Teilhard called planetization. And in his view, the core energy of life is love. You know, in some ways, it comes down to something as simple at the heart of every single person, which drives us, even in our technology. We long to be connected. We long to belong to another. We long to give our hearts away to another. Love as the core energy of the universe is love, the core energy of God, because God is love. And therefore, Teilhard says, love alone will bring us to another universe. Thank you.
Thank you for that inspirational and just really breathtaking presentation. We have a few minutes for questions. What are some of the things that came up for you, some of the things you were thinking about as Sister Delio presented these ideas? Questions?
Do you believe that transhumanism and posthumanism can eventually collide and coincide and are both similar steps to the same direction?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Say it again.
Yeah.
We just say it.
Transhumanism and posthumanism, their relationship moving forward,
Yeah.
and if transhumanism is like the next step in posthumanism.
Is transhumanism the next step in posthumanism? In some ways, there is something of transhumanism in posthumanism. I think what posthumanism does, it does not look, here's how I might put it. Transhumanism tends to be binary. In other words, it tends to say, my mind is not necessarily, I can download my mind, I can, remove it, and I can become something different. Posthumanism is saying the mind is embodied. And so I think posthumanism retains the embodiment of consciousness. But we can use technology to enhance that embodied consciousness. So I see something of transhumanism in posthumanism, but I opt for posthumanism over transhumanism, precisely because I don't want us to become dualistic or to think that we can separate our minds from our bodies and put them in new beings, put them in new chips, upload them into new types of things. Embodiment belongs to the world. And I think once we get out of embodiment, we're going to have to rethink what is the transhuman avatar embodiment. And so, it's more problematic. Yeah.
Other questions?
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
My students often remind
Give her this so we can get it on
Your
tape.
students often remind you. My students often remind me that humans have been filling this mystical gap with material things for a very long time. So technology is not any different than Augustine's approach to sex or humans' long relationship with substance abuse or things like that. So why is technology, so I'm always of the mind that technology is much more dangerous than sex and drugs, which might put me at odds with some people. But that idea, that was on tape. But that idea, like why is it, this idea that it's divisive, sex can be divisive, drugs can be divisive, but technology can sort of destroy us.
So, technology is ambivalent in its value, right? We create the technologies. So technology is a mirror of our desires. That's about as simple as you put it, right? I mean, in other words, why are we creating this? Who are we creating it for, and what do we want with it? So we can use it to enhance beauty in the world. We can use technology to enhance unity in the world, but it's the values we give to technology. And that's, I'm talking about the religious dimension of technology, in a sense, that's what we're talking about. What values do we bring in these creativities? Is technology, is it an escape? Is it a type of narcissism? And it can be as well, right? I can go online and I can find anything. I mean, really, it's an infinite world online, right? But what will guide me in my choices online? Because that's what we're saying in terms of the mind and matter. In other words, where I focus my attention makes a difference then to what my life becomes when I make a decision or a choice, right? And so we can cyberbully if we want. We can be mean online. We can be destructive online, and yet we can gather together. So technology is an extension of our own nature. I don't see it as something as a tool that can, it is what we are now being extended into something new. And therefore it depends, we have to be thoughtful about it. I think we need something like a theological reflection on technology, in our use of technology.
I have a question. So one of the things you said a couple of times was that religion or theology is not keeping up really with the evolution of technology, etc.
Yeah.
And yet, I think you're suggesting that we need transcendence, we need religion, we need some kind of, I don't know if I want to call it faith. So I was wondering.
Yeah, so when Tarrant speaks of consciousness as the inside of the universe, he's saying there's a religious dimension to cosmic life itself. So religion is not a human phenomenon. I mean, I think that's something we have, like we came along and ta-da, there's religion. What he's saying is the whole universe, in a sense, is self-transcendent, right? So long before we arrived, in a sense, there was a religious dimension. By religion, I mean that there's something about nature that longs to be bound to something other than itself, a unity, a wholeness, like a oneness. And there's something that drives this universe to complexity and greater consciousness, which he calls omega. So I think that this question of religion is too narrow. We're way too narrow about religion. And we need to widen our understanding of religion first. And I would begin religion on the level of cosmic life itself. Why do cells? A biologist will say, well, because, some kind of physical explanation. But even that alone, we can't keep reducing everything to material components per se. There's something that drives that. So it's the driven energy of cosmic life itself. That is the religious dimension. We humans just come to a conscious awareness of this religious dimension. And so you can trace religion in evolution, through consciousness, pre-axial, axial, post-axial consciousness.
Yeah, that is really love, that energy.
Yes, in the sense that in other words, what drives cosmic life is, he says, the energy of love. And by that, he's, in a sense, simplifying that ultimately, all life, not just human life, but all life seeks personal center-to-center relatedness, unity, creativity, and transcendence. Those are the characteristics of love as the core energy of the universe. And that at the heart of all of that is what the name God, in a sense, points to, that mystery of the ultimacy of those things. Mm-hmm.
Any last questions?
Yeah.
Is the church likely to get on board anytime soon?
No. But I do see Pope Francis trying to make some steps in this direction. It's not going to happen. I mean, in all honesty, we need, if we're really to be fair about this, we need to revisit original sin. We have to revisit what we understand by the human person, and we have to accept evolution, not just of the body, but what we mean by soul. What is the soul of a human personhood in evolution? And what is the nature of soul in relation to mind? We haven't done that work. It's just not there. And so I don't see this happening too soon. So without it, I don't think the principles of Laudato Si can really be fully realized. I think they're noble, I think they're wonderful, but we have known the problems of global warming for a long time. They do not, we're concerned now because our future seems to be compromised, but we're not changing. We're not changing anything about our lives, quite honestly. We remain in the same kind of, we feel that we're networked, but our actual lives are still very individual, right? And so we haven't come to a new sense of personhood in evolution because we have no sense that God is in evolution and that God is that unity that binds us. So Teilhard would speak about the cosmic Christ, but he said we need a convergence of religion, that spiritual energies are the core energies that are needed today. And without that religious conversion, we can become avatars and become transhumanists, and we'll still have global warming. Not to be a downer about all this, but I'm just
There, question back.
yeah, please. Yeah.
So I guess my question is about the nature of all of this. In Genesis, God destroys the Tower of Babel and creates the nations and the tribes. And that the whole of the Old Testament is about the stories of nations and tribes. And we continue on, we look at the letters to the Corinthians, whoever, and there is a unity in Christ, but there's also differences between these tribes and groups. And then when we reach Revelations, we hear about, it still talks about nations, and I'm just curious about what this unity, total unity means, because in Revelations it does talk about the end of the world coming at the destruction of nations.
Right.
So
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I think, I think Scripture, and you use the word story. If I can just, use your language, right? They're narratives, right? They tell us something about the way God is involved in our lives, in our world. And they're meant to be read precisely in that way, as ways of understanding God's ways. I think if we look at Jesus in the New Testament, someone who pushed the boundaries, right, beyond the confined Judaism of his age, right, so reaching out to Gentiles, to Samaritans. We take that as a sign, a symbol of what we're called to do, to transcend boundaries. We're called to be, it says, Jesus, I find creative. He was a whole maker in that sense. And that's how I understand salvation, as that love of God that makes us whole, because when we're made whole, we help make others whole. And if we extend what we're about then to, say, the nation state, because, truthfully, we haven't always been nation states, and there's always been some kind of geographical configuration in the world. But we know that, even geologically, we're shifting. And we can anticipate, in 100 years' time, maybe Florida will be where Africa is, maybe Greenland will be where Iowa is. And you think, oh, that's crazy, right? So here's the narrative, really, I think that Teilhard pulls out. We need to say, well, what are we becoming? Because what we become is what the world becomes. We are, in a sense, what the world becomes. We create the world. Scripture says, see, I am making all things new. But God makes all things new in and through us. I think that's what the New Testament's about, right? Jesus does, the human person does new things. The human person is creative. The human person thinks in a new way about the future. Technology has picked up on that, very quickly and says, yes, we will do new things. We will create the future. And this is why we may look to Scripture to say what God has done. And now we need to be attentive to what God is doing in our lives if we are to anticipate that future heaven and earth that God promises, in Revelation. So that's how I would like to read Scripture. It's forward-looking, not backward-looking, right? It anticipates a world of becoming in the fullness of God.
Last question. There you go, Charlie. I saw it emerging, evolving.
Virtual reality, wow.
Sister Delio, thank you so much for such a rich and provocative presentation and conversation with us tonight.
society. My question for you is, you're inviting me to think about the Eucharist in new and interesting ways. And I'm wondering if you are asking us to imagine the sacraments as technologies in a certain way, as the body of Christ comes together to make God emergent in the world. If that's the case, is there something distinctive about spending time together as bodies in a room, as opposed to mediating that through the other sorts of technologies that you, with Nicholas Carr, invited us to be slightly worried about what it does to our sociality, our relationships, our identity?
Right, so, no, that's a good question, in terms of Eucharist and embodiment. And I think, again, going back to the transhuman, posthuman question, what I see technology, maybe what I want to favor in this, is that technology can extend that embodiment. And therefore, but the Eucharist as a sacrament is a prime opportunity to reconfigure, in a sense, what we are, in a sense, in a Catholicity, in a wholeness. And I like to think of the Eucharist as kind of entanglement, rather than this kind of, body and soul of Jesus, maybe the entanglement of divinity and humanity in the person, and that we become entangled with one another. And to have a consciousness, what I think is lacking today is a consciousness of deep connectivity, which science holds out for us, but we haven't yet symbolized or sacramentalized. And that's what Pope Francis is pointing to, but we don't have the sacraments that get us there. So that's a fabulous place to continue thinking through in new ways. And if we can come to a new entanglement of Eucharistic life, then technology can extend that life, right? It can Eucharization of the planet, so to speak. That cosmic life becomes Eucharistic, right? So Teilhard thought wide, and we need to think wide, beyond the human community, because we're part of the cosmos. And so what we are affects what the cosmos, the whole, becomes. Work to do there. Yeah, good.
Sister, thank you so much for mind-bending and privilege.